Okay, we're getting started. We have a lot to cover. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. My name is Stefan Wick. I'm a program manager lead on the Windows team. My team works on the UWP app model, as well as on the desktop bridge for Win32 applications.
And I'm Jenny Cahey. Welcome. I'm president of Carolina Software. I'm a Windows Development MVP, and I build applications for the solid waste industry. They're in use all over the U.S. and Canada. Thanks
for joining me today, Jenny. I'm very
excited.
So the title we have for our presentation is quite a mouthful. So what is it really that we want you guys to take away today? So when you plan your next client application project for Windows 10, we want you to consider UWP as the starting point for your development project. To that end, Jeannie and I have prepared a number of demos today to hopefully inspire you, and also we will bust a couple of myths about UWP along the way. By the way, at the end of the session, we will have two Surface Dials to give away, so we will raffle them out, so hopefully everyone got a ticket already. And so, why UWP? You may ask. Why do you make me learn, another new technology? And that's a fair question. And so you probably already know UWP is a great platform for building touch-friendly, modern UI that has fluent design, has great inking capabilities, and all these things that our marketing folks like to talk about a lot when they talk about Windows 10 app development and UWP. But did you also know UWP provides a secure execution environment, provides great deployment options, and has powerful LOB controls? We'll cover that today. UWP is the native platform for Windows 10. Just like Win32 was the native platform back in NT or Windows 95. Windows is heavily invested in UWP. All the new experiences that we're building in Windows 10 today that you're seeing there are built on top of UWP. Whether that's the Action Center, the Start menu, Cortana, all the system apps that come with the operating system are all built on top of UWP. So we have the biggest interest in making UWP the most powerful, most flexible, most secure, most accessible, and most beautiful platform that there is for Windows. Win32 also is a flexible and powerful platform, and all of you guys have built great things with it in the past, and those are applications that will continue to provide tremendous value on all versions of Windows today and for years to come. But Win32 is not without challenges in today's world. So keep in mind, the Win32 and MSI-based solutions, the model for those have been invented in a time when you bought software in a box on a disk. Anyone still remember that? Going to the store, buy a box of software from the shelf? My kids, can't understand that when I talk about that. But that was the time when Win32 was invented. It was also a time where everyone was an admin, the internet wasn't really a thing, and security and privacy wasn't a big topic. Those traditional installers, they write files and registry keys all over the system and potentially impact other apps that are already installed on the system, or even impact the system in some cases. Have you ever installed an application and after that your system was never the same again, even after you uninstalled that application? Have you ever noticed your PC getting slower and slower over the years? Those are phenomena that we commonly refer to as PC rot or DLL hell in kind of the classic Win32 and MSI-based world. Win32 apps can do powerful things, and we've built great applications with that in Microsoft, and you guys have done that. But a buggy or malicious apps can also do a lot of harm to the system and to your business and to you personally if it steals your data. So if you have have an exploitable bug in a process that runs at full trust, that can be exploited in really bad ways. And probably for you guys, running LOB apps, most of the LOB apps probably don't need to run at full trust, right? So have you ever seen on your system the Explorer process crash or hang? You probably have. And the Explorer team has done some analysis on that a while ago, and they found that the vast majority of their crashes reported through Watson were actually coming from third-party app code that loads their DLLs into the Explorer process, and then, due to bugs or whatever, crash at some point, taking down the Explorer process, making the whole system less stable. That was even to the point where the Explorer team decided to push new features into the operating system to make Explorer crash better. It's now the process that's probably crashing is best and fastest at crashing and restarting because of that problem that was created due to the lack of a proper app model in the Win32 world. Also, if you have your laptop app up and running, you might want to check in your task manager on the startup tab. What are all the apps and processes listed there as startup process? So those are processes that start on every user logon and potentially keep running for your entire user session. And I'm wondering if you actually know what these are, and if you ever have given your consent to those processes running, chewing your CPU, draining down your battery, and wondering if those are actually providing enough value for you to justify that. So how does UWP help? So the UWP app model provides a secure execution environment and trusted deployment. So the first thing to point out here is that UWP actually has an app model. We also refer to Win32 as an app model oftentimes, but it isn't much of an app model if there are no real rules, because in Win32, whatever works you can do, and there's no way for us to enforce any of that. So in UWP, well, in Win32, we do have best practices, and sometimes we even publish them. So in UWP, we actually have rules, we have defined an app model, and we have ways built into the operating system to enforce them. With our deployment pipeline at installation time, and with the app container at runtime. So UWP apps run in what we call an app container. So this is not like a Docker container or something like that. The app container is a very flexible sandbox that provides process-level isolation to the UWP application. And this sandbox is configured with the capabilities that the application needs. So it's kind of going by the principle of least privileges. So a calculator, for example, doesn't need a lot of privileges. All it needs is take the user input, do some math, and display the result. It doesn't need to be able to know your location or access your documents for them. So in the UWP world, it can't. Apps that require capabilities, they need to declare and disclose them so the user is aware. There are privacy-sensitive capabilities, such as location, camera, microphone. There is also a first-use consent dialog provided by the operating system to ensure the user is not only aware, but explicitly provides their consent to a particular app using this privacy-sensitive resource. And then furthermore, the user, as well as the admin in the enterprise, is in control at all times over the capabilities that apps have. So they can configure those on a fairly granular basis, on a per app and per capability basis. So if I want my users to use the Facebook app, but I don't want Facebook to be able to track the location or use the microphone, I can configure it in that way. So the app will still run. You can browse your posts and everything, but it will not be able to use the location feature or use the microphone feature if that's what the user or the admin has disabled. Furthermore, the UWP deployment pipeline ensures that at installation time, everything that's written down to the system is localized to the app's installed folder. This ensures that there is no impact on other apps on the system or on the system itself. It also ensures updates are always clean and uninstalls are always guaranteed to be clean. So you will never regret installing an app. Also, any form of shell integration that a UWP app does, or system integration in general, is happening out of proc as a matter of principle. So you can integrate with Explorer also from a UWP application, but the way it's done is that your code will run out of proc to the Explorer. So if you have buggy code and you crash every once in a while, your functionality will crash, but Explorer or other system components will not be impacted by that. So another important point to make is that UWP is a platform that is agnostic to the app framework and the programming language. So that's something that maybe not everyone is fully aware of. Most people think, okay, UWP is this C# and XAML, because that's what most of our samples are using, and that's it's a great choice. It's my preferred choice, but it's certainly not the only choice. And there are many other choices. And for example, you can build UWP apps with JavaScript and HTML. You can build UWP apps with C++ and DirectX. Did you also know in UWP we support Unity as a framework? We support React Native. We support Xamarin as a framework. So those are all choices. So that also means as a developer coming to UWP, you don't have to start all over and throw away your existing skills, your knowledge, your code. You can actually bring a lot of that to UWP and reuse it. It also means you don't really have to make the choice like, oh, do I do .NET or UWP? No, it's .NET and UWP. Or do I do web or UWP? No, it's web and UWP. And our web platform team actually had a pretty exciting announcement, I think 2 weeks ago on our web summit, where they now announced support for PWA's progressive web apps in UWP. So that's pretty hot off the press, and that goes along the way of you don't have to choose between web app or native app. You can have your cake and eat it too. So UWP is the future of Windows application development. It's a native platform, and it's adaptive. And it's adaptive actually in many important ways. UWP automatically adapts to the user's input. So it's designed from the ground up to work well with mouse, work well with keyboard, with touch, with pen, with ink, with speech, whatever your user's input mechanism is, UWP will automatically support that for you. It also adapts automatically to screen size and form factor. So UWP provides adaptive UI controls and layout that help you with that. It adapts to your device's capabilities. So you can build an app package that takes advantage of all the powerful capabilities on a desktop PC, but then still runs on a mobile device or on a HoloLens or on an Xbox, and leverages the specific capabilities of that device as well. So it will light up different features depending on where you deploy and run it. Last but not least, it also adapts to the version of Windows 10. So UWP has a fairly flexible versioning system where you can take advantage of new features that are in the latest update of Windows 10, but still target lower versions of Windows 10 if in your enterprise, the majority of PCs are still, let's say, on the anniversary update, and you want to take advantage of some new features in the Fall Creators Update that only some people run. You can support that with a single app package that lights up those features dynamically. So it also means UWP is both universal as well as very targeted to the specific device that you want to run on. So even if you're only caring about the PC today and only building desktop application today, UWP is a great choice as it allows you to run great on that platform, and you are also set up for the future automatically if you ever want to take your app to, let's say, a Surface Hub device or distribute it to Windows 10 users via the store. So UWP can't do what I need. So it certainly can't format your hard drive. It can't crash Explorer. So those are some of the good things. So since the original release of Windows 10 and UWP, we've been fairly obsessed with data, and we try to be fairly data-driven in how we evolve the platform. And so we've been listening pretty carefully to the various feedback channels that we had, and collected the feedback on like what are the gaps in UWP that our developers, our users need us to close. And so we've aggressively prioritized and delivered on those, and that's what we want to talk about more today in the context of the Fall Creators Update, which is just a couple of days away from hitting RTM. So we'll see about that. So we've collected a number of phrases that we've received via user voice or Twitter when we asked users for feedback, and so we will tackle all of these today. And so let's start with this one. Microsoft doesn't even use it, so why should I? So this couldn't be further from the truth, actually, and I already talked about it a little bit. So Microsoft as a company is all in on UWP, so that's not only the Windows division. So the new Paint app is one great example. Obviously that comes from the Windows division, but outside of Windows, the Skype team has released a new version of their app that is built on UWP. The OneNote, the new OneNote version, if you haven't checked it out over the last couple of months, it has received a ton of great updates, great new features. All their engineering resources are focused on the UWP version of OneNote now. And also the Microsoft Teams team actually announced, as part of the Web Summit 2 weeks ago, has announced that they are actually taking the PWA route, the Progressive Web App route, to be a UWP on Windows 10. So, and Cortana, of course, I already mentioned that all the experiences that are built into the Windows 10 operating system are built on top of UWP. So, next one, and I think it's time for a demo here, actually. So UWP doesn't have the LOB controls we need. So earlier this year, I think in February, at our Developer Days event, we announced that we now have available free and open source LOB controls from Telerik for UWP. And so I want to go ahead and demo those. So what I did, I need to wake this up, I guess. So what I did, I played a little bit with the Microsoft Graph APIs to retrieve some information about my organization, and then I thought about, okay, how can I present that in a client application to my users in a meaningful way, and kind of work with the data. And so I found the Telerik data grid control actually a good choice for kind of dealing with that kind of data. So let me show you how that looks. And so for the demo, I've pointed to the Contoso organization, because those people are actually a lot prettier than the Windows engineers, and certainly they're better shaved. So I built this little UWP application that is using the Telerik data control here at its center, so I can browse my organization. I have a UX that works well with mouse and keyboard, but I can also use touch and other input devices. The Telerik data control comes with a lot of features built in that you don't have to write the code for, so I can easily group my organization by manager to see who reports to whom and things like that. I can obviously sort and filter by things. And all of that comes for free with the data grid control. You don't have to write code for that. So that's very, very handy. I was very impressed with the functionality that I got with like almost no coding here. Also, I've plugged in some charts here so I can see the distribution by kind of job title in my departments. So those are also Telerik controls that you can easily throw into your XAML and then just assign your business objects as data context, and then basically the magic happens. So let's take a quick look at the code here. So this is my XAML. I hope the font is big enough. You don't really need to see all the details, and we'll share the code next week, I guess, when we're back in the office. We'll put the code on GitHub and we'll send it out publicly so you can study it in detail. The data grid control really, is for the most part is a single line of XAML here. In my case, I needed a few more lines, but this is really just for this part because I wanted to customize the one column in my data grid so I can display the picture of my employees. So that's not a standard cell type, so I had to create this template so I can totally customize it, can plug whatever controls I want into the data grid here as well, so which is pretty powerful. And then from a code perspective, it's really easy. I just assign the data context to my list of employees, and the employees are just plain .NET objects. In my case, they're all string properties that I get from my data backend, and that I just assign to my data grid, and the data grid knows how to put things on the headers and where to put the data through data binding. So that was a pretty good experience. Very similar experience with the chart control as well. So with that, we're switching back to deck, and we'll look at the next piece of feedback. So this is a big one. UWP can't connect to SQL Server, obviously, for many LOB scenarios. That was an important gap, and so very happy that we finally got to solving this one with the fall creators update. As I mentioned, we'll RTM in just a couple of days, and we're now bringing SQL client APIs to the UWP platform. And so, Jeannie, how did this work for you? You have tried it?
I have. Does this application look similar to something you may have used or perhaps built yourself with Windows Forms? Anybody out there used a Windows? You have, all right. You may recognize the data. Does anybody recognize this data? You do, okay, great. This is the Northwind data sample. Now, the Northwind data is by no means new. In fact, the oldest data in the Northwind sample dates to 1996. Last week, I was looking through the Northwind employees table, and I discovered that the oldest employee was celebrating a birthday, her 80th. So this data is just not new at all. But you know what? That is just fine because old data is frequently valuable. My own clients will have data sometimes that's even older than 1996. It's still providing value to them. And the data access is still valuable too because SQL Server continues to be refreshed and updated to respond to new challenges and opportunities. A new version was just announced this week as being released. So let's take a look at, briefly, how this type of application was constructed. This is a Windows Forms application with a data layer. This is the way I have been building my applications for business for many, many, many years. Like Stefan, I have a very simple business class that I've used basically forever that holds the data at rest when I retrieve it from the SQL Server and collections from those. And I have a data helper that uses the SQL client code to retrieve data from the database or do inserts into the database. And this is all working just great. But going back to the application itself, let's be honest, it's beginning to look a little dated, as well as representing all of the other issues of not being UWP. It's not touch-friendly. And trust me, it doesn't look great at every screen resolution. I have found out this week it sometimes looks, frankly, horrible. So that's the issue that you get into. What I would really like to do in a perfect world is be like Tinkerbell over at the Magic Kingdom and wave my magic wand and come up with a brand new UWP application that provides all of the business functionality of my solid WinForms application, but for Fall Creators Update. So this is what I've come up with. This application takes advantage of several new things that are new with the Fall Creators Update. One thing you may notice is this acrylic effect that I'm getting absolutely for free with the new navigation view control that comes with Fall Creators Update. I can do many of the same things that I could do in the WinForms application and some things in addition. I still have, for example, accessibility hotkeys, just with a simple property that's set on menu items. You can tap the Alt key, and you can see key combinations. So, for example, I can do Alt-N to create a new order. Now, you notice my new order view is a separate view from the main view. Not everyone realizes that UWP applications can have more than one view at the same time in the same application. And the particular way I'm building this view is using a technique that first came out in Creators Update, Compact Overlay, that allows me to keep one view always on top, even when a different view has focus. Now, the reason I'm doing that isn't just to be clever, but also to show you that you can now sort of drag and drop orders over from your product list to the order that you're building as a very easy way of adding things to your order. I've showed this to several people who think this is absolutely the easiest way to go. And no demo of Northwind is complete without selecting a beverage. I know I should choose coffee this morning, but sorry, folks. When I do Northwind, I do beer. So we're doing some beer, and we've got several people in the room who look thirsty, so I think I better do a little bit more beer. Maybe not quite that much. So now we've got an order. Who are we going to charge this order to? Well, let's see. Paris Specialité, that sounds good for me. Now somebody's going to have to pay for this order. So let's tap the payment button, and I'm using a feature from my Microsoft Wallet to charge John Smith for this nice load of beer and other things. He conveniently lives in Redmond, so perhaps he won't find out what I'm doing for a little while. I can select a shipping method. I can select, oops, don't want to change that. Now let's show the details just to verify. Yep, there is all the beer. And now I could hit the pay button and ding his credit card really big time.
How much code did you have to write for this whole, complicated payment functionality?
Oh, about this much. Almost none at all, because I didn't have to do any of the authentication. I didn't have to do this UI at all. I don't even have to pay for it.
Oh, well,
Okay, so it's really easy. But the service has been reacting negatively to all my charges. So I'm going to try one time and see if they'll accept this payment. And if they don't, we'll just kind of move on. So here we go. Come on, John Smith. Don't let me down. Let's do this thing. Come on, come on. Yep, it's me. Windows Hello kicking in there, recognizing me. All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Will it work?
Huh.
Wah, wah, wah.
Must be the demo Wi-Fi.
That must be it. That must be it. So we'll just charge them later. We'll just charge them later. So I'll just save it as a charge. And I'm going to print a receipt. Now, I've been hearing about the paperless office as long as I've been in business, and that's a really long time. But friends, it hasn't happened yet for my customers, and maybe the same for you. But I'm printing using some helper code from the UWP Community Toolkit that provides a print helper wrapper around native Microsoft APIs, so I can print a receipt. And if I had a little receipt printer here, I could just send it right to the printer. But since I don't, I won't do that. So now I've created an order. Well, let's go take a look at it. So now I'm using the same Telerik data grid that Stefan showed earlier, with all the same ways that you can look at data in different ways. You can rearrange data by customer ID, for example. But in this case, I've extended the code just very slightly so that I can double-click on an order and I can view the detail, or perhaps reprint it if I needed to, using the very same view code that I did for the new order with very slight modifications. And this is typically the way I'll work with a business application. I don't want to write the same form over and over again, even if it's a shiny new UWP form instead of Windows Forms. Similarly, I can do a chart. Look at all those beverages, people. That's because I've been testing this Northwind data by buying beer every time I do a demo almost. But if I go back to some really, really old data, I'll see a more normal distribution. So I'll go back to 1996, and you can see that, well, I may have swayed the results slightly, but there's a more normal distribution of the data. And that took almost no code. I think it was about one line of code to wire up the data back into to the chart or to the grid, and maybe 3 lines of code to fetch a subset of that data depending on the date ranges requested. So that's really very, very simple.
How about the SQL code? How much
work
was that?
The SQL code. That's the best part of all, because the SQL code, see all this SQL code here? All I had to do was copy it here to the Northwind code. So here's the same product class. And if you look at the data layer, very same SQL client code. I did not change anything at all. Very same. So that's where all the hard work is. It's not quite like waving a magic wand, but the solid business logic code can come over directly from my old applications. And that, I think, is huge. That's due to the magic of .NET Standard 2.0 support, beginning with Fall Creators Update.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeannie. So let's see, what's next on our list here? UWP can't interrupt with my legacy system. So interrupt obviously is an important part in your enterprise. And UWPs have great app-to-app capabilities where UWPs can interact with each other through well-defined mechanisms. Also, Win32 apps can participate in those mechanisms, but they have to be enlightened for that. But then you also have systems or software on your systems that that maybe you can't enlighten, that you don't have the source code or the ability to change it in any way. So, but still you need your UWP application to continue to interop with those systems. So going back to like all the way to Windows 8.1, we provided a partial solution to that problem back in the day for the modern store apps at the time. We released a platform feature that was called brokered Windows runtime components that essentially allowed you to talk to another component that you ship separately and install separately on the system, which can then run outside of the app container and handle the interop with your legacy systems. So that was kind of a partial solution. You know, it worked for some scenarios, and obviously it's still supported today. So if you rely on that, that still works. But it's partial in the sense that it's not a great solution because it doesn't solve the deployment problem for your app. So because you have to deploy now two different parts, one, you know, your brokered component and your application, using different install mechanisms, and then you need to figure out how to keep them in sync and when you update them or uninstall them. So to kind of provide a better solution for this type of problem in Windows 10, since the anniversary update, we have a better path for you to go about this. And let me show you that in a demo. I'm locked out again here. And so what we've done in the anniversary update, one of the big improvements in the anniversary update was the desktop bridge technology and tooling that we shipped to allow you to bring your existing code investments from the Win32 world into the UWP world, and then also in your UWP package to continue to use your components from the Win32 world. And that is also a great path for you to deal with interop situations where you can now package your existing interop code that talks to those legacy systems with your UWP package. You know, invoke it from your UWP code when you need it. The component can do its job and talk back to the UWP. And that way, you can now manage the whole solution. You know, in your app package, it is one deployment. It is one entity that you install, update, and uninstall. So I'm using a simple example here. Again, in my Contoso application. So I have a code that I've written a long time ago to automate Excel on my PC, and so I'm using kind of the old interop APIs that Office released like probably 10 years ago, and those are great tools that I have and I've been using for a while. And I want to reuse it now in my brand new UWP application, and so let me first show you kind of the feature in action, and then we'll look at the code just a little bit. So I'm clicking export to Excel, and so what happens is Excel starts, and you see I'm actually populating the spreadsheet here as I go using Office automation APIs. So this is not specific to Office, it's just the example that I use. You can use this with whatever other sort of interfaces or interop mechanisms you need to support. So let's look at the key pieces of the code here. So one of the key pieces here is that I'm launching a full trust component from my UWP here because I need to run this particular piece of code outside of the app container because that's how the legacy interop requires it. But I'll do it in a way that is kind of dynamic and adaptive in a way, because I still want my app to be like fully universal and run on all Windows 10 devices. So I only run this code if I'm on a system that supports this particular feature of doing interop with legacy desktop components. So what happens here in this line of code is that a specific executable that is part of my package and defined in my AppX manifest via this extension gets invoked. And so now this is the other component here in my solution, which is basically a headless classic .NET desktop application, which is using the Microsoft Office interop APIs to automate Excel, and the same way I could automate Outlook or Word or interop with other applications on the system that are not aware of UWP or its interaction models. And so I have this sort of two-component model here. The two components have what we call an app service connection, which is a two-way communication pipeline, so they can talk back and forth, and they share the same app data and have great ways to communicate and share. Yeah, so that's the LOB interop demo. You can go back to the slide. So what's next? Starting with UWP is too hard. That was a piece of feedback we heard in the early days. Visual Studio had just sort of the blank template, so you got an empty Hello World application, and people were like, okay, how do I go from here? How do I actually build an app here? And how do I make sure all my apps look kind of consistent if I always have to start at zero? So earlier this year, we announced the Windows Template Studio, which is a great extension to Visual Studio to make this easier, and Jeannie will tell us all about it.
Microsoft listens to a lot of customers for new features in UWP, but I was one of the ones that said starting with UWP applications is too hard. And it's not because I'm a new developer, I was just new to UWP. And it's not because UWP is any harder to learn than any other framework. It's new. I'd go to conferences, I'd listen to the sessions, I would look at the demos, I would read the sample code, I would fire up Visual Studio full of enthusiasm, and this is what I would be faced with. File, new project, Windows Universal Project. What do I do now? Well, with Windows Template Studio, I've got a framework for building brand new applications from scratch that are industrial strength and extensible. I'll show you what I mean. Now, the Windows Template Studio template is not standard with Visual Studio. You need to download it from the Visual Studio Marketplace. But they've had a lot of downloads. It was just announced at Build in the spring, and there have already been over 100,000 downloads of Windows Template Studio. So I'm not the only one that's a fan. Now, the way Windows Template Studio works is you select some options from a dialog. It's checking to see if there are any updates, and now it's presenting me with the choices that I have for building my application. First of all, I need to pick the type of application navigation I'm going to use. Navigation pane, pivots and tabs, or blank. Please, not blank. Let's go with navigation pane. Similarly, I can pick a framework for data binding. I'm old school, and I like code behind. I admit it freely. So I'm going to use code behind. But MVVM Basic is supported. Laurent Bugnon's MVVM Lite framework is supported, and I understand that a future version of Windows Template Studio will support Calibre Micro. So you can work the way you and your teams like to work with data. So I'll stick with that for now. And go to the next step. Now I get to choose what kind of pages I want in the application. Well, I always like to have a settings page. I think that's pretty important. I think a master detail page is a useful thing to show. I might want multiple master detail pages in a real application. And I'll also pick a grid because, let's face it, nothing says data like grids, right? And this grid is going to use the Telerik grid that you've already seen several times already. I'd also like to take advantage of toast notifications. But that's probably enough for now. But there are plenty of options, and the team is continually adding new ones. So I'll go ahead and create this project, and it takes a little while to do. While the project is being created, I'll mention that Microsoft is heavily involved in Windows Template Studio and directing all the development. So I know frequently it's important to enterprise users and customers to remember where their tools are coming from and whether or not they're being supported. But it's also open source. So you can see the code on GitHub. You can even modify it if you choose to do so for your own enterprise to give your applications in your enterprise a common look and feel across the various applications. Well, that was pretty easy. Let's see how far I can get with F5 here. So I just hit F5. It's pulling down some packages from NuGet. Most of the packages it's pulling down are the Telerik UI package. It's probably pulling down some other helper code. Takes a little while, but not very long. And here's an application that I have pointed and clicked. And you can see here's a sample toast that's already popped up to let me know that feature is already working. I've got, in addition to the main page, which is blank because I haven't added any of my own code, a master detail page with some sample data that's filled in so you can see how it's going to look, and then you can add your own data instead later. I've got a grid, which by now should look extremely familiar, and that settings page. So for example, I can allow the user to specify darker light theme in the application very easily without any coding at all.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, how many of you have built an application and your users use it and your managers look at the data that comes from the report and they are so completely happy with it that they don't want any changes at all? Yeah. I don't think that has ever happened in my long career. And the Windows Template Studio folks, they recognize that you might want to change some things later too, so they make that easy to do. Even after you have been working on a project for a while, you can take advantage of the template to add additional pages and additional services. I can just right-click, choose Windows Template Studio, and then New Page. So it's going and checking again for template updates. They may have changed since I first built the application. So I've got a choice now of some new pages. Well, I think I'll pick the chart this time. So I've chosen the chart, click Next, and it's showing me the changes it's going to make to my production code in case I want to back out at this point. No, that's not what I wanted to do. But in this case, I think that looks pretty good, so I'm going to click Finish. And it's added a new page, or is in the process of doing so. So it looks like it's done it now. Again, let's do F5 and see where we are. So the application's building again. And pulling down more NuGets, possibly. Deploying. There's that toast again. Good to know that the old functionality is still working. It remembers my preference for a dark theme. I can select the chart, and here's that Telerik chart. So that's pretty easy, a pretty easy way to get started. But those of you who've had a lot of coffee already today may be wondering, all right, where does the code go? Are we back to the same problem we had before? Where does the code go? Well, one way to find out, an easy way to find out, is to do View, Task List. Because Windows Template Studio comments everywhere you should make your own code changes right within the code, the generated code. And many of these comments also include links to the Microsoft documentation that explains how to use the feature that's being needed there and exactly what you need to do, like you remove this here when you have real data. So I think that's a pretty easy way to get started.
Yeah, well, that was awesome. Great demo. Thanks, Jeannie. So we have one more here. UWP is missing critical desktop features. So yeah, so this one kind of, probably goes back all the way to Windows 8 when we first introduced kind of the modern apps, the modern store apps at the time. Those were really kind of focused on being, touch-friendly, single window full screen application. So we kind of took the S out of Windows at the time. And so with Windows 10, we're definitely putting the S back into Windows. And since then, we've been pretty busy, adding desktop-specific features to the Universal platform. And let me kind of show you some of the newer things here that you may not have seen yet. So I'm going back to my org tracker application here. Let me start it. No, it's still running here. So one of the things that you've already shown seen in Jeannie's demo is the ability to have multiple views of your application and having those views be topmost and things like that. So I don't know why this guy's carrying toilet paper or what is I can create these guys, so I can basically pin these contacts here on my system using multiple views. And yeah, so that has been an area of investment, like building, better window management APIs. It's an area where also we know we still have a lot of work to do, and definitely looking for feedback from you guys. What else do you need in this kind of space so we can prioritize this type of work? So this is kind of like multi-view, multi-window kind of capabilities. Another thing that's kind of common for desktop users and desktop application is, people just want to run things from the command line. That's how they've done it forever, and they don't want to stop doing that. They like, command line arguments and these kind of things. When UWP was first introduced, the UWP applications can only be started from a tile or from the app list. So now, with the Fall Creators Update, you can make your application command line aware, so you can actually launch it from the command line, and also provided command line parameters. So in this case, I can provide like which organization I want to manage in my application. So I've passed in the Contoso organization, but let's say I'm an HR department in charge of multiple organizations. I can do that as well. So I have another organization here that I can point at, and so this is my Ignite organization. I know with a couple of other guys that I've created for this demo. So command line launch, a new feature in Fall Creators Update. Let me take a quick look how how it's done, because UWP applications aren't like, naturally in your path, so you could launch them. So the way it works is, again, it's an explicit declaration from the developer in the manifest. And so we have a new extension that's called App Execution Alias, and here you can declare in your manifest at install time, hey, this is my app. I want it to be launchable from command line, and I can handle that. And I can specify kind of how this is being done, and then this. There's kind of a dummy org tracker.exe that essentially gets added to your path, so you can launch it. While we're here, I want to take a look at one other thing here that we're also releasing in the Fall Creators Update. This is the Startup Task extension. This is a way to auto-launch your application. Oh, wait, didn't I say earlier that this is an evil thing and apps shouldn't auto-launch themselves? Well, the feature itself is not evil. The feature itself is actually pretty good, and you want it in many cases. But it needs to be done in a way that the user is aware and in control, and not behind your back, just sneak in all your processes and auto-launch them. And so that's also kind of how we are approaching all the feature gaps in UWP. We're not just shooting for line-by-line parity and just bringing them in, because then we're creating the same kind of problems that we're trying to solve from the Win32 times. So what we're doing is we're bringing the features in, but in a way that works within the app model, and that works within the promises we're making around security and privacy and user confidence. So let's see how this works. So let me uninstall my app real quick, and then I'll redeploy it. So the way it works for a startup task is that the startup task always starts as disabled, as a principle. And so when the user launches your app, the app can ask for it to be enabled as a startup task. And so now the operating system pops up this dialog. This is not an app dialog. The app can provide the strings or the name of the task, but everything else is provided by the operating system. And so this way we ensure the user is aware, the user has actually provided consent to enable it, and the user also has the information how to later disable it. That was also included in the dialog. So pointing folks here to the task manager, here it is, and here the user can disable it. We're actually building a better UX for this right now as we speak for the next update. So we're moving all that into the settings app, where it really kind of belongs, where you manage all your sort of privacy and app-related things. We'll have a section there where you can also manage your startup task in a very discoverable way. All right, so that's that demo. So we'll go back to slides real quick. And we have more. So we got past that. So the next piece of feedback, I can't use my favorite .NET NuGet libraries in UWP. Many of them target, higher versions of .NET. So what do we do about this? So with the Fall Creators Update, UWP is now supporting .NET Standard 2.0, the sort of latest level, highest level of .NET Standard, which in turn enables a vast majority of NuGet packages that are out there. So if you are using many of those today in your WPF projects or in your ASP.NET projects, you can just use the exact same libraries in your UWP projects, starting with Fall Creators Update. Jeannie, do you have an example for this?
I do. I don't know if you'll like it, because I'm doing export to Excel differently than you did.
Let's see that.
This is a trick that I've been using basically forever to get data into an Excel format, and that's to export it to CSV, create a file that can then be launched with Excel to get the data in there. So I thought, well, that might be an interesting thing to show, a different way of getting data into Excel. So you can choose the date range, similar as you've seen before. Tap Export to Excel. What's the name of the file that I want to use to save it as? Do I want to overwrite that file? Sure, why not? It's launching Excel. See?
Huh.
How about
cool.
that?
Wow. That looks much easier.
There's frequently more than one. Well, I don't know if it's easier. It's not as powerful as your approach. But it is fast, and more importantly to me, it's the way I've been doing it. So I'm comfortable with it. It's another example of using skills I have. But one thing that was new for me was figuring out how exactly am I going to do this in terms of a UWP application. So I thought I would look on NuGet to see if somebody else had already done that first, rather than writing out the code myself. Because reinventing wheels is so 20th century, right? So we look at the NuGet Package Manager, and I came over here and I browsed on CSV. And sure enough, a bunch of CSV NuGet packages popped up. What a surprise. Well, I looked at the very first one, and I scrolled down to see what versions of .NET it supported, and I found out that in pre-release was a version that supported .NET Standard 2.0.
Cool.
So I gave it a try. And as you see, it works just great. It only took one line of my code to create the CSV file that I could then launch Excel passing that in as a parameter. But I was intrigued more to find out if the author of this NuGet, if he actually was planning on UWP when he created a .NET Standard 2.0 version of his library. His name is Josh Close. I found his GitHub repository with the code, and I found a picture of him so I could go and disambiguate him from all the other Josh Closes in LinkedIn from his picture, and I connected with him on LinkedIn and eventually on Twitter, and I asked him if it was okay if we showed his demo, which he said sure, and did he realize he could use his library code with UWP, and he seemed not to know that that was possible. I'm not sure he's ever built a UWP application.
Nobody knows.
So his motivation for moving his library code to .NET Standard 2.0 had nothing at all to do with our presentation. It had nothing at all to do with UWP. He did it for purely selfish and very intelligent reasons, to make his life easier as a library developer by having just one version of .NET that he could support going forward. So his code is now in pre-release. I'm actually one or two updates behind the version that he's continuing to work on. He says he's at the stage working on documentations and expects to have a release version soon. So just because you don't have the code from the UWP libraries, think about .NET Standard. Let NuGet Package Manager be your friend and see what you can find. I was really impressed.
Yeah, well, that's awesome news, especially for .NET developers.
Yeah.
And we have one more before we go into a Q&A part of the session. So UWP can't target cross-platform to iOS and Android. So many of you, might be focused on desktop applications, but more and more, there's also the importance of mobile applications or mobile companion applications for your enterprise applications. And in many cases, that means iOS deployments or Android deployments. So UWP apps don't run on iOS or Android, but with Xamarin and .NET, you can build applications that target all three of them, that target UWP, that target iOS, and that target Android. And I want to show you this in action. So I've actually built a mobile companion app for my little org tracker application. And actually, let's start in Visual Studio here. So here's my mobile version. Let's first take a look at the project structure here in the Solution Explorer. So I have a shared project here. And here I have my data layer. So this is the exact same data layer that I had in my desktop application over here. This is the exact same code that I've just copied over. Better practice would be to create a shared library that I can just share between the projects. But for demo purposes, I just kind of copied it over there. So this is the same code. I didn't have to rewrite that. This is just plain standard .NET code. I did write a new XAML here for my mobile application because this application is not the same as my desktop application. I don't need a big data grid with 100,000 employees that I'm managing. I really want this app to be on the go where I can quickly look up one of my colleagues and see, okay, what's the contact information, maybe figure out, what's their manager, what are their team members and things like that. So I kind of want a different UI here that I can define. And I can define it in a shared way. So all the code here actually is in the shared project that goes cross-plat to iOS, Android, and UWP. And then I have heads here for the three platforms. So I can write code here as well. If I wanted to write some iOS-specific capabilities, or make the UI a little more special or different on iOS, I can do so, but I don't have to. In my case, I did all the coding in the shared project, and then I can go ahead and deploy each of the heads to the respective platforms. And so let me show this in action here. So I've actually deployed the UWP version here to my Windows 10 mobile device. So I can look up a certain employee here. So here's my buddy Ben. I can figure out what is his management chain, what are his direct reports, what is kind of his entire org, and then I can browse people, figure out what's their contact info, and so on and so forth. So that's the UWP version. Let me close this out. Then I can go ahead and set Android as my startup project and deploy to Android. So I'm using the emulator here that comes with Visual Studio. I've already preloaded it here. The emulator on my laptop is pretty slow because I'm not using the hardware acceleration here, so it'll probably work better on a real development machine. But here again, I have the same application, same code running on an Android device, and I can browse my organization in this way. And then same for iOS. We can go ahead and deploy the iOS head over to an iOS device. And this way, I can support all these platforms. One thing to note here also, dealing with devices and emulators during development is always a bit of a hassle and kind of a time sink. What's nice thing, or what I personally like a lot about Xamarin, is that since the UWP head is a UWP application and by nature runs on any Windows 10 device, I can just run this thing here natively on my development PC for testing, so I don't need to put it on a device or on an emulator. I can debug and test it right away here, which gives me a much better experience during development and testing. So that's about mobile companion development with Xamarin and .NET. Let me just kind of quickly summarize a few things before we go into Q&A. So since we're talking about the context of enterprise and LOB development, which is mostly happening on desktop, I want you to take away that there's a lot of investments happening on our end that are specific to desktop. We want UWP not only to be the best platform for Windows 10 in general, but also specifically for desktop app developer like you guys. So one of the big investments that we've done over the last sort of 2 years is the Desktop Bridge project. There was a dedicated session yesterday that was great. You might want to catch the video if you haven't seen it, about the Desktop Bridge, which enables you to bring your existing classic applications forward into UWP. So if you have existing WinForms, WPF, MFC, these type of applications, you want to start taking advantage of UWP, you can do that with the Desktop Bridge. You can easily package those applications, which will immediately give you the deployment benefits and several other benefits of the model. It will not run your app in the app container. It will still run you as full trust, so you don't get all those benefits just from packaging. But you can start distributing through the store, you can start calling UWP APIs, and you can start moving your code over into the app container world kind of gradually at your own pace. So that's a pretty great story for your existing projects. For new UWP projects, we're continuing to expand the API surface aggressively. So the .NET 2.0 expansion this fall was probably the biggest one we've done to date, which added like, I don't know, 20,000 APIs or some pretty large number like that. And we're continuing down that path, also enabling more Win32 APIs for desktop app developers directly, from the UWP app container. And then, there's all the innovation happening in Windows 10 with mixed reality, Project Rome, and all that. With UWP, you are at the forefront of that as well, and you get the best possible experience for those as well. So in a nutshell, with UWP, you have a lot of competitive advantage as an app developer over other app development platforms and frameworks for desktop. Here I'm listing just a couple of them. I won't have time to go into the details here. I do want to call out Store for Business and Education. I think that's a great distribution mechanism for enterprise scenarios. We had a deployment session yesterday that talked more about the deployment aspects of UWP. So if you missed that, you might want to catch the video on that. And then I think we're moving to call to action. Go get the SDK. As I said, Fall Creators Update is just a couple of days away, so you might want to jump on that if you're exploring UWP. Also, you'll find pointers to Windows Template Studio on that link and other great tools and documentation. We'll publish all the source code, as I mentioned. Best way to keep in touch on that would be to follow us on Twitter, and we'll post when it's live. If you have any feedback, ideas, suggestions on UWP, definitely go to our user voice website. We are looking at that pretty much every day for new incoming requests or any pain or gaps you might experience. So we're definitely watching that closely. Related sessions, already pointed out a couple of them. I'll leave this up for longer. Tomorrow there are 2 great sessions. One for UWP, like tips and tricks in Visual Studio. This is more about the tooling side of things. It should be awesome. And another one specifically on Fluent, how to build like really beautiful apps, not like the apps that we showed today. So that's tomorrow. And please remember to evaluate our sessions. We're looking forward to your feedback. And now we're raffling off the 2 Surface Dials, right, Arian? Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. I'll leave the session slide up, and where's this? Here we go. And we'll take questions now. And please step up to the microphone for your questions. Don't be shy. All right, now we'll do the raffles first. Yeah, do you want to draw the first number, Ginny? Okay, the number is 122753. Do we have a winner? All right, there you go. Where's the prize? Oh, there we go. All right, and the second one. Second one is 122799. Congratulations. All right. If there are no questions, then I think that's it. I'll stay around for a little longer. If anyone wants to sync up offline, I'll be happy to stay around. Thank you very much.